How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
There is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balance stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rape clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rape clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rape clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time.
Order. We now come to questions to the Secretary of State for International Development, Mr Gareth Bacon.
Number one, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with permission, I would like to group this question with questions 6 and 12. The UK Government works in 35 low and middle income countries to implement legal, regulatory and policy reforms to make it easy for business, including from the UK, to operate. Business enabling environment reform was also discussed at the UK Africa Investment Summit, which secured commercial deals between UK companies and African partners worth over £6.5 billion.
Gareth Bacon.
Does the Minister agree with me that now that we have formally left the European Union, we have an exciting opportunity to build on our historic ties with the Commonwealth and use close business links to help developing countries create wealth?
Very good. I couldn't agree more with the honourable gentleman. He raises a good point. The government is committed to working with our Commonwealth partners, support and deepen intra-Commonwealth trade, improve the business environments in Commonwealth countries to enable them to be more globally competitive, and facilitate the economic empowerment of women and young people by providing more business and educational opportunities. And he'll have an opportunity on Monday to take part in the Commonwealth debate.
Sir Jamie Walls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that we've left the European Union, the UK can deepen and expand our trade with countries and businesses across Africa. Can my right honourable friend update the House on progress made to develop the potential that will develop and benefit constituencies across Wales?
Indeed so. This is a great opportunity for constituencies across the country and all our nations. Leaving the EU provides this opportunity to explore the best ways to develop our trade and investment relationships across Africa. Did the honourable gentleman want to intervene? Trade Connect was announced at the Africa Investment Summit. It will support African businesses to increase their presence in international markets while supporting UK firms to source products. This will benefit UK customers with more choice, quality and lower prices.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's comments on the success of the Africa Investment Summit, and can he please update the House on how we can further strengthen our economic partnerships with African nations?
I certainly can. The honourable gentleman raises a very important point. We're working with African countries to promote mutual prosperity. This incorporates a range of initiatives to increase trade and investment, including a new growth gateway. This enables businesses to access UK government's trade, investment and finance offer for Africa all in one place.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all of us should be truly proud of our contribution to international development, yet this question demonstrates the dangerous direction many in the Tory party are looking to take aid spending. The Department for International Development does not exist to increase the size of doing business abroad, nor is it a part of the Department for International Trade. Indeed, the public goodwill and trust in this department has been because every penny spent has been on helping the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. Mr. Speaker, as the Government undertakes its integrated review, will the Secretary of State reaffirm its Government's commitment to a fully independent department with Cabinet-level representation? And does she agree with me that this should not be compromised for a quid pro quo deals being made to facilitate aid for trade?
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that this department does have cabinet representation, and I would take the point. I would just make the point that trade can be and is a key driver for economic growth. It triggers positive changes in a country's economy. This helps raise incomes in the poorest countries, creates jobs, lifts people out of poverty, and helps countries move beyond trade dependency.
Chris Elmore.
Speaker, can I first of all welcome the Secretary of State to her place? I will take an answer from the Minister, but I do warmly welcome her to her new position in Cabinet. In terms of the role of the Department in terms of investment in developing countries, the International Labour Organization set global standards for employment rights. So as the DFID invests in African nations, will he also ensure that those governments do meet international labour standards and indeed higher than those standards?
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that where we do have these interests in developing countries, we take those rights incredibly seriously. Our network fully engages with these countries, and I know that this fantastic array of ministers, which will shortly do some travelling, will ensure that that is the case.
Drew Hendry.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Climate action is a priority for the UK Government and the Department for International Development. We've recently doubled our commitment to the International Climate Finance and will spend £11.6 billion over the next 5-year period on helping poorer countries tackle climate change. Since 2011, ICF has helped 57 million people cope with the effects of climate change and provided 26 million people with improved access to clean energy.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you. Drawing climate finance solely from the 0.7% will not be sustainable as climate change takes its toll. And drawing from the aid budget will mean cuts for health, education and life-saving measures. So what plans does she have to establish new and additional sources of climate finance?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely disagree with the honourable gentleman. Finance is critical, but it's more than just finance. And the UK will be hosting COP26 this year in partnership with Italy. And as I'm sure he will be aware, this will be happening in Glasgow. But tackling climate change is about tackling climate change is about so much more than just about finance. It cuts right across the work that we do in the Department for International Development.
Tommy Shepherd.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies, I am short on voice today, for which many across the House no doubt will be very relieved. The Government's 2019 spending review allocated sufficient funding to ensure the UK can deliver our commitment to spend 0.7% of gross national income on official development assistance in 2020-21. Thanks to this Government's focus on a strong economy, we can deliver on this commitment, improving the lives of millions in developing countries. For example, giving over 14 million children access to a decent education, immunising 56 million children and supporting 52 million to access clean water and better sanitation in the last 2 years alone.
Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the question because in 2013 the Secretary of State tweeted an article which questioned the 0.7% target of GDP, and more recently she circulated an article by the former Development Secretary saying that the waste of cash in vanity projects in far-flung lands had kept her awake at night. So can she confirm here today that she has changed her mind on this matter and is now committed to the 0.7% target going forward?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I am absolutely committed to the 0.7%. I'm committed to spending it both in value for money terms for the British taxpayer who's funding it, but most importantly is to make sure that we help those countries that are most fragile, most in need both of aid and then development, so that they can become strong, independent countries themselves to get to that point. And that involves doing lots of things, not necessarily in the way we've done them before, but making sure that we've got a long-term investment perspective to help those countries become self-sufficient. I don't want it to always be that some countries are dependent on UK or international aid. I want them to be self-sufficient, proud countries on their own 2 feet.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Given the likely effect of COVID-19 on populations DFID works with, what plans exist to establish contingency funding to deal with mitigation for those populations and to shift funding to development of a vaccine, which is a global equity?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question and indeed for his enormous amount of work in previous iterations of his post in this department and in others. He's absolutely right. The challenge of both finding a vaccine for COVID-19 is something that we are actively involved in and have already supported £5 million to the WHO. I was speaking to Dr. Tedros yesterday to find out what other support we can bring, not only in cash terms but in terms of expertise, skills from epidemiologists through to logisticians and those sorts of skills that will help the WHO to be able to drive forwards in those most difficult, weak health systems across the globe to make sure that they have the support they need.
Is she confident that her department has the sufficient resources to deal with the consequences of the ongoing conflict in Syria, especially given the recent call of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees for international support for those refugees trapped in Idlib to be sustained and stepped up?
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I think we are all continually horrified by the increasing abandonment of any kind of respect for humanitarian law that we're seeing in Syria from the regime supported by the Russians. I signed off an £89 million package last week to provide more immediate help in that area. The challenge is getting it in making sure that those who are able to deliver that humanitarian relief are able to get in and out safely. The Foreign Secretary was in Turkey yesterday, also continuing on that question of how we can find ways to make sure that those communities are at least able to keep warm and fed whilst we find ways to really sort out this impossible humanitarian challenge.
Laura Farris.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Apologies. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. This is a demonstration, if I may say, Mr. Speaker, of joint working with the FCO. This is the Foreign Secretary's cold, which he's shared, most unreasonably. I know. And we sent him abroad. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll group question 4 with question 11. Promoting 12 years of quality education for all girls by 2030 is a personal priority of the Prime Minister's and of mine. Girls in fragile states are central to this. When girls are educated, societies are healthier, wealthier and more sustainable. The UK is the leading donor to the Global Fund for Education in emergencies, which supported over 1 million children to attend school in 2018.
Thank you. There is a fantastic charity in Newbury, Afghan Connection, which has built or renovated over 100 schools in Takhar province, where most adult women are illiterate and yet their daughters go to school because the charity's offered separate school buildings and female-only teaching staff. What steps can my right honourable friend take to support schooling that reflects social and religious sensitivities like this?
I thank my honourable friend for raising the excellent work done by her local charity, Afghan Connection, and I look forward to hearing more about the work they're doing. Perhaps we can join that up. DFID supports marginalised girls' access and stay in school through strategies such as gender-sensitive infrastructure and pedagogy. DFID supports 2 Girls' Education Challenge projects in Afghanistan specifically. The UK is the largest donor to the Global Partnership for Education and for Education Cannot Wait, which supports girls' education across fragile states.
Jonathan Gullis. I thank my right honourable friend for her previous answers, and as a former secondary school teacher, I know first-hand the role that education has in unleashing potential. So can my right honourable friend update the House on what steps her department is taking to support women and girls in fragile and conflict-affected states to ensure that where somebody is born has no bearing on their future potential?
I thank my honourable friend for his service to education before coming onto the green benches, and I know that he will support our commitment to educating girls. Girls in emergencies and crises are more than twice as likely to be out of school, so the UK prioritises quality education in conflicts and crises. We are the largest donor to Education Cannot Wait, the Global Fund for Education in emergencies, and bilaterally we are supporting education for over 600,000 girls in Syria and surrounding countries.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State to her place. International Women's Day is a focal point of the year to celebrate the movement for women's rights and gender equality, and we welcome her department's focus on girls' education. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that girls' education is a basic and universal human right and not something which should be used simply as a means to achieve other ends? And will she commit to implementing a gender transformative approach across DFID's work to help dismantle the structural causes of gender inequality?
Well done.
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I agree absolutely that education absolutely is a right for all, but especially for girls. I think we all know that if you educate a girl, that community gains so much more than just that education, and that is something that at DFID and across this government we are absolutely committed to. We are working in a number of areas in terms of gender equality, reductions in violence against girls, and as part of the focus that I'm going to give to DFID around girls' education for 12 years as the Prime Minister's absolute commitment, we will be drawing together all those constituent parts.
Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, could I welcome the new Secretary of State, and also the fact this morning marks the inauguration of the Speaker's chaplain, and it's lovely to see her fully in the chamber and leading our prayers. But would the Secretary of State agree with me that we need much more energy coming from legislators worldwide if we're going to tackle girls' education worldwide, my own WHO work with reducing road accidents worldwide? Can't we get the CPA, IPU and legislators around the world helping ministers to do the job properly?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It sounds to me like the honourable gentleman has just given himself a job to come and help me draw together the plan that we want to bring together, which is exactly that, which is that if the focus is on ensuring that every girl across the globe has 12 years of education, we do need to include all those for whom that makes it possible. Safety to get to school, the appropriate sanitation in those schools so that girls can keep going. So I would look forward to him coming to help us.
We're going to have to speed up, seriously. You're very good, but you're too detailed. Anthony Bagman.
The Secretary of State will be aware of the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict initiative that was set up in 2012. Would she agree with me that this initiative needs to be relaunched and shown new leadership in a forthcoming conference later on this year?
I think the short answer is yes.
Flora Anderson. Flora Anderson.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
More than 700 million people do not have enough water every day, and climate change will make this worse unless more action is taken. DFID is supporting poorer countries to understand how climate change will affect water availability and to manage their water resources sustainably. DFID spends about £300 million a year on water, which since 2015 has given over 51 million people across 30 countries clean water or a decent toilet.
Flora Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you say, 800 million people across the world still don't have access to clean water, and clean water is a first line of defence for coping with climate change. We are seeing at the moment the need for hand washing, and you need that for clean water. But the most climate vulnerable countries have some of the lowest levels of clean water across the world. Only 5% of global climate finance is spent on helping countries adapt to climate change, and it's climate change adaptation. Will the Minister increase funding for water, sanitation and hygiene projects to tackle the impact of climate change and adapt?
Order, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By 2030, 40% of the world's population will be facing water scarcity unless action is taken, and we in DFID take this very, very seriously. This year is critical for galvanising global ambition on climate change, which is why COP26 is so important. And DFID's programmes cover many crucial aspects of water security, but there is much more to do to avert the global water crisis.
Gareth Davis.
7, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll group this question with question 8. DFID has over 150 infrastructure programmes, including providing water, roads, electricity, schools and hospitals. This government has established the International Development Infrastructure Commission to accelerate our work in this area.
Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Infrastructure is critical for economic growth, creating jobs, boosting businesses, but we must also be mindful of the natural environment. What steps is the government taking to ensure that new infrastructure development in developing countries is sustainable?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. DFID is investing directly in infrastructure programmes that will enhance climate resilience in developing countries. Our work is focused on creating the right enabling conditions to direct private finance into low-carbon infrastructure, expanding Africa financial markets and unlocking investment through innovative instruments such as green investment bonds.
David Evan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the work that my honourable friend the Minister is doing in this important area. As we look to the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow later this year, can he update the House on work with countries across Africa to help them develop their clean energy potential?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his passion for Africa. We are committed to working with African countries to boost renewable energy potential and cleaner energy alternatives. For example, Mr. Speaker, the Africa Clean Energy Programme is working in over 15 countries to increase deployment of off-grid renewable energy.
Speaker, the Department invested nearly £300 million of taxpayers' money in the airport on St Helena. Will the Minister update us as whether aircraft can now land and take off from that expensive airport?
That's very good. I'm familiar with the situation, as the honourable lady knows, and I'm more than happy to update her in writing.
Rick Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to clean water in sub-Saharan Africa is an absolute essential prerequisite to development there. What steps have been taken to support small charities who excel in that type of activity in that much-needed land?
Provision of water is absolutely essential, and the Department are particularly keen on enabling small charities, particularly small British charities, in this sector. And if the honourable gentleman has any particular ideas, I'm more than happy to receive that, as are my colleagues.
We now come to topical questions. Anthony Higginbotham.
Topical number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're proud to maintain our manifesto commitment to spend 0.7% of our income on international development, helping countries to become economically self-sufficient, free societies where liberal values can flourish. And this is firmly in our own interests. The climate change challenges, alongside championing 12 years of girls' education and preventable diseases, it will be our focus. These are global challenges, achievable thanks to different investment in world-leading British business, talent of our innovators, and our world-class defence and diplomatic network. So I'm determined that the British public's altruism will be reflected in the outcomes that we see from DFID funding.
The United Kingdom plays a leadership role in countries around the world, projecting our values and ensuring that free societies can flourish. Education is a key part of that. So ahead of International Women's Day, what steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure every child gets 12 years of education?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Talent is spread around the world, but sadly opportunity is not. 12 years of quality education is a key priority, and I'm proud that between 2015 and 19 we supported 14.3 million girls to gain a decent education across 70 of our most fragile countries. As another International Women's Day comes to us, we have the opportunity to refocus our energies on making sure that that becomes the number, that there is not a single girl not educated.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the new Secretary of State to her post. She leads one of the most important government departments that literally saves lives every day. Over 60 countries across the world have reported at least one case of coronavirus, but as yet we've not seen a widespread outbreak in sub-Saharan Africa. What immediate steps is she taking to ensure the preparedness of the world's poorest nations in the event of such an outbreak?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He's absolutely right. The great challenge is to be able to support those countries, should they need it, where the health systems are weakest, and I'm working very closely with the WHO, alongside obviously our colleagues at the Department of Health, to make sure that we can support them with the technical skills as well as funding. We've already given £5 million to their initial fund to make sure that they can be as prepared and reach as quickly as possible to those countries that will need it.
And Carden.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Idlib and across Syria has reached a horrifying new level. Indiscriminate bombings are killing civilians and humanitarian workers. 1 million people have fled their homes. People are sleeping in freezing conditions. Children are dying. We welcome the government's increased humanitarian response. But what is the UK, as a member of the Security Council, doing? And when will the Prime Minister play his part to lead diplomatic efforts to protect civilian lives in Syria?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is out in the region at the moment, continuing to work with regional leaders to try and find ways to move forward, supporting the Turkish communities who are looking after so many displaced people. We continue to be, as I said earlier, horrified and appalled by the humanitarian legal breaches that are going on, and we continue to support. I signed off £89 million last week to make sure that we can support as best we can.
Ruth Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, British scientists led the world in vaccine development. What steps is DFID taking to support the next generation of inoculation and vaccine development?
The UK is hosting the Global Vaccine Summit in June, supporting Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to raise at least $7.4 billion towards vaccination for the world's poorest children. Ahead of the summit, we are convening world-leading British academics, private sector and civil society in Liverpool to highlight UK research in the field of global health that helps unlock barriers to ending preventable deaths.
Alison Thoulas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State, she's read the UNICEF report on ending preventable child deaths, and can I ask what specific actions and finance will DFID employ to meet the aim of ending preventable child deaths by 2030?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a report that we welcome, and with it its recognition of the work the UK is already doing. The report is in line with the government's ambition to end preventable maternal, newborn and child deaths by 2030. We will be publishing a paper shortly setting out how we will work with others to reach this goal.
Michael Fabricant.
The coronavirus, SARS and other such similar illnesses are believed to have been started in unsanitary butcheries in Eastern and Southeast Asia. What role does the department have, or can it have, in trying to produce cleaner butcheries so we don't get this transfer from animal to human disease?
Well, research and development is incredibly important. That's why we have committed over £40 million thus far. I take the honourable gentleman's question very seriously. Through our networks, we can project and promote good practice, and I'm sure that's what our network is doing.
In Colombia, peace is very unstable at the moment with a fragile peace process. We are giving money for security reform, but no money for policing and community development. 52 trade unionists and community leaders have been assassinated just this year alone. Will the government put money in to support policing and investigations?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is very well aware of the situation in Colombia and in Venezuela, and the UK is one of the largest donors to the humanitarian response in Venezuela, and the top donor to CERF and education cannot wait. With regard to his specific point on policing, I will come back to him.
This is not the normal situation, but I think it's very important that I welcome the Pakistani governor of the Punjab, who is a former colleague and member of this House, Mohammed Sawa, who is in the gallery today. So welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Number one, Richard Graham.
Number one, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is now 2 years to the day since a chemical weapon was deployed by Russian military intelligence on the streets of Salisbury. All our thoughts remain with those affected, their families and loved ones. We will continue to seek justice for them. But I'm pleased to say that 2 years on, Salisbury is back on its feet, focused firmly on the future and welcoming visitors with open arms. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure this House will want to pay tribute to the people of Salisbury and Amesbury and wish them well for the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
As the government prepares the nation for the worst of coronavirus while working for the best, now is the time to wash our hands and pull together. So does the Prime Minister agree that we need a robust plan in place to cover any significant cash flow losses of businesses so that employees and their mortgages, rents and benefits will still be paid? Will the Treasury consider delaying, if need be, VAT and PAYE collection? And does the Prime Minister agree with me that, come what may, as we saw during the devastating floods in Gloucester of 2007 and elsewhere recently, that Britain will find the strength, perhaps aided by a cup of not necessarily Yorkshire tea, to pull through?
Well, my right honourable friend is entirely right. We're, of course, monitoring the situation closely and are prepared to support individuals, businesses and the economy to maintain economic confidence, quite rightly, and our action plan, our battle plan, points to mitigations that already exist, such as HMRC's time to pay, which is there on a case-by-case basis to support firms struggling with payments.
The opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will join me in congratulating the Prime Minister and his partner on the news that they're expecting a baby. And I also join the Prime Minister in wishing the people of Salisbury well. It's a wonderful city. I visited it many times. And, of course, what happened to them was utterly appalling, and their safety and security is paramount for all of us. I also want to pay tribute to all the medical staff and indeed expert public servants here and overseas who are doing the vital work to combat the spread of coronavirus and looking after those affected. Yesterday, our part-time Prime Minister finally published the steps that his government will take to tackle the outbreak of the disease. And the strategy broadly has our support. But a decade of Tory austerity means our National Health Service is already struggling to cope. Bed occupancy levels are at 94%, and hundreds of our most vulnerable people are being treated on trolleys in corridors. What additional funding will our overstretched and underfunded NHS be given to deal with this crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the right honourable gentleman knows, this government has put in record funding into the NHS, and we've pledged that we will give them everything they need to cope with the crisis. I think it might be for the advantage of the right honourable gentleman and the House if I update the House on where we are with the coronavirus outbreak. And as yesterday's plan made clear, we are not at the point yet where we are asking large numbers of people to self-isolate, but that, of course, may come if large numbers of people have the symptoms of coronavirus. And if they stay at home, the House will understand that they are helping to protect all of us by slowing the spread of the virus. And that's what the best scientific evidence tells us. If they stay at home, and if we ask people to self-isolate, they may lose out financially. So I can today announce that the Health Secretary will bring forward, as part of our emergency coronavirus legislation, measures to allow the payment of statutory sick pay from the very first day you were sick, instead of 4 days under the current rules. And I think that's the right way forward. Nobody should be penalised, Mr. Speaker, for doing the right thing.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that, but I want to ask him a couple of more questions on this subject. Is it true, as has been reported, that police forces are likely to become so overstretched by coronavirus that 999 response times will have to be extended, and that even investigations into some murders will have to be halted as a result of this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are not at that stage or anything like that stage yet. Our police forces, he knows, our police forces are well able to cope with all types of eventualities, and they have long-standing arrangements to prepare them for such pressures.
Mr. Speaker, under this government, there are 2 million workers on low pay, many of them women in the care sector, who are not eligible for statutory sick pay at the present time. The Prime Minister's statement just now it's not clear whether it covers them or not. And those on Social Security could face sanctions if they miss appointments, and therefore they and their families will face terrible hardship. When the Prime Minister brings forward the emergency legislation, will he guarantee that workers' right to sick pay from day one, as he's just indicated will apply on statutory sick pay, will apply to all claimants, and those people that are not currently eligible for statutory sick pay therefore will have to make a terrible choice between health and hardship?
Well, the right honourable gentleman is raising a very important point, and of course we are very much aware of the issues faced by the self-employed and those on 0 hours contracts. I should stress that some of them will be entitled to statutory sick pay. Others, a great many, others will be entitled to help through the existing systems such as universal credit. And we are urgently looking at the application process to reflect on the advice on self-isolation. But I think the members of the public have appreciated the way hitherto that I think that members have come together across the floor of this House to deal with this crisis, and I think it would be common ground between us all that we want to do everything we can to avoid penalising those who are doing the right thing.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not being clear about this. The reality is, if you're on universal credit or just put onto it, you've got a 5-week wait before you get any benefits. Will he be absolutely clear that nobody will have to choose between health and hardship? Because it's a matter of public health concern for everybody. Mr. Speaker, our part-time Prime Minister failed to turn up on Monday to answer a question about a breach of the Ministerial Code. In his own foreword to that code, the Prime Minister wrote, "There must be no bullying and no harassment." Will he now commit to an independent investigation into the Home Secretary's conduct, led by an external lawyer, and commit to a date when its findings will be made public?
Mr. Speaker, of course it's right that there should be an investigation into any allegations of bullying. That's what the Cabinet Office is doing. That's what Sir Alex Allen will, of course, be doing. But I just remind him, since he mentions the Home Secretary, that she is keeping this country safe by putting in record numbers of police officers. She believes in stopping the early release of offenders, and she's bringing in a system to tackle our migration crisis with an Australian-style points-based system. He would scrap stop and search. He believes in getting rid of our security services, and he certainly wouldn't tackle our immigration system, Mr. Speaker.
Jeremy Corbyn.
It's about whether he will release the findings of an investigation into the Home Secretary's behaviour. I repeat to him, a government cannot be judge and jury over its own conduct. There has to be an independent element to that investigation. Overnight, Mr. Speaker, further allegations have emerged that the Home Secretary repeatedly harassed and humiliated her private secretary while she ran the Department for International Development. If this is true, this suggests a shocking and unacceptable pattern of behaviour across 3 government departments. On each occasion, tens of thousands of pounds of hard-earned taxpayers' money has been spaffed up the wall to buy their silence. Was the Prime Minister aware of these allegations? And if he was, why did he appoint her?
Mr. Speaker, I'm really going to repeat the point I just made. The Home Secretary is doing an outstanding job. I have every confidence in her. If there are allegations, of course, it is right that they should be properly investigated by the Cabinet Office, and that is what is happening. But I take no lessons about bullying, Mr. Speaker, from the leader of a party where female MPs were bullied so badly in the matter of anti-Semitism they actually left the party, and where the Shadow Chancellor has still not apologised for his call for a member of our party to be lynched.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said if there are allegations. Is he completely unaware of all the allegations that have been made over the last few days? Is he completely unaware of the resignation of a permanent secretary because of his treatment by the Home Secretary? Mr. Speaker, we have a part-time Prime Minister who barely turns up but is determined to cover up for bullies in his government. There can't be one rule for workers across this country and another one for him and his ministers. When his Home Secretary has been accused of repeated bullying and harassment, leading to hard-working staff attempting suicide by overdose, he gave her his full support. How can the people of this country have faith in a Prime Minister who can't be bothered to turn up, and when he does, has no shame in defending bullying in his own government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is the question from a full-time neo-Marxist who's failed to stamp out bullying in his own party. And actually, I'm very proud, as I say, of the record of this government just over the last 82 days. We've taken back control of our borders, our laws and our money. We've got Brexit done. We've set out a new points-based immigration system. We've put more money into people's pockets through the biggest ever increase in the living wage. We've guaranteed more funding for schools by increasing the minimum funding for every pupil. We've restored the nurses' bursary, introduced a bill to set a record cash boost for our NHS, and ensure there will be a free hospital car parking for everybody who attends a hospital. And we're delivering gigabit broadband for the entire country. That's just, to say nothing of the police that we're recruiting, Mr. Speaker, that's just in the last 82 days. We're getting on with delivering the people's priorities.
My constituents in East Surrey care enormously about climate change. Would my right honourable friend agree that yesterday's news that the UK carbon emissions have been reduced by a third over the last 10 years is a fantastic and important Conservative achievement? And will he set out his plans to continue this progress?
I will indeed. I thank my honourable friend. I will today chair the first ever Cabinet Committee on Climate Change in recognition of this government's revolutionary commitment to cut to net zero by 2050, one of the many ways in which the government is leading Europe and the world in tackling climate change.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like the Prime Minister, I note the 2-year anniversary of the terrible attack in Salisbury, and it's important on these matters and other crises that we face, such as coronavirus, where appropriate, that we do stand together. Mr. Speaker, coronavirus is causing deep and genuine concern across society. We know that up to 80% of the population are at risk of infection. All of us must provide clear, calm and practical leadership in the days, weeks and months ahead. In the past few days, Scotland's First Minister, the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government have been working closely together to put plans in place to protect all of our people. Yesterday, the Governor of the Bank of England suggested a financial bridge may be available to assist markets through any volatility. If there is a financial bridge for markets, can the Prime Minister tell us, will there be a financial bridge for all workers and indeed those that rely on benefits that should not risk the threat of sanction if they can't make appointments?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for the excellent cooperation that Scotland, indeed all the devolved administrations, have given in preparing the battle plan. And yes, and really to recapitulate my answer to the right honourable gentleman, we will take every step that we can to ensure that businesses are protected, that the economy remains strong, and that no one, whether employed or self-employed, whatever the status of their employment, is penalised for doing the right thing.
Blackford.
Well, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and I commit my party and our government in Scotland to work constructively together. Of course, people are worried about their health, but there are millions of workers who are worried about the consequences for their incomes, their job securities and their families. What I do ask is that the Prime Minister gives specific guarantees, and certainly we will work together with the SNP in pushing for emergency legislation, but clarification that all workers will be fully protected from the first day of sickness, and that those payments should be up to the level of the real living wage. And emergency legislation to guarantee that staff that are asked to self-isolate and their businesses are fully supported. That is the leadership that is required, and I ask if the Prime Minister will commit himself to working constructively with all of us to that end.
Well, again, I thank the right honourable gentleman for the spirit in which he raises the question. He will have seen from my earlier answer that what we are indeed doing is advancing the day, on a temporary basis, advancing the day by which you are eligible for statutory sick pay from the fourth day to the first day. I think that is the right thing. And again, I repeat, we will support business. We will make sure that we keep the economy strong. No one should be penalised for doing the right thing. And I'm sure that my right honourable friend the Chancellor will be happy to engage you with further conversations with him about the detail of how we propose to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is St Piran's Day, when Cornish men and women around the world will be celebrating our national saint and all things Cornish. St Piran is also the patron saint of tin mining, but mining is not just something assigned to Cornish history. Is the Prime Minister aware that significant deposits of lithium have been identified in Cornwall, which provides the opportunity of levelling up the Cornish economy and providing the UK with a domestic supply of this critical mineral? Will the Prime Minister commit his government to enabling Cornwall to make the most of this opportunity and wish all Cornish men and women a happy St Piran's Day?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This country, as my honourable friend knows, leads the world in battery technology, and it is a wonderful thing that Cornwall is indeed boasts extensive resources of lithium, and we mean to exploit them. I know that there is no more passionate champion of Cornwall. I wish him a happy St Piran's Day, and Kerno Bisvicken, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week's historic judgment against Heathrow expansion found that his government broke the law by ignoring the Paris Climate Agreement and by breaching its own sustainable development duty to future generations when it drafted the airport's national policy statement. Will the Prime Minister tell the House today precisely how many of the government's other national policy statements have been assessed against the Paris Climate Agreement, and will he commit right now to reviewing and, if necessary, revising all of those which have not?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady. She can take it that we will ensure that we abide by the judgment and make sure that we take account of the Paris Convention on Climate Change. But I do not believe for 1 second that that would be the impediment to our delivery of an infrastructure revolution across this country.
Sean Bailey. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, communities like mine in West Bromwich West are grateful for this government's commitment to 366 police officers for the West Midlands. Would my right honourable friend reaffirm that, unlike the Labour PCC, who's decimating communities like mine in Tipton with the closure of our police station, that it's this government who's committed to keep our communities safe through investment in the police and tougher sentences for the criminals that are ruining the lives of my constituents in Tipton?
Thank you very much. And that is precisely why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is working so hard to recruit 20,000 more police officers, to enhance stop and search powers, and that's why we've set out plans to build more prisons and keep violent and sexual offenders in prison for longer, Mr Speaker. And I'm delighted that the West Midlands, thanks partly to his lobbying, is receiving another 366 police officers.
I note that in the interests of public safety, the government has taken emergency measures to rush through legislation to ensure that those convicted of terrorist offences serve their full sentences. Given the far smaller conviction rate and far more substantial rate of reoffending for those convicted of sexual offences, will the Prime Minister commit to a wider sentencing review so that communities can rest assured that sex offenders who pose a threat to children and women are serving their full sentences to ensure their rehabilitation?
Well, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady on what she has just said, which I think may have come as a bit of a bombshell to some of her colleagues, but she is entirely, perhaps on the front bench at any rate, she is entirely right, and that is what we are doing, as I said in my earlier answers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend if he commits to making sure that Blythe Valley benefits from the government's ambition to unite and level up across this fantastic country?
I can indeed, Mr Speaker, and I can indeed, Mr Speaker, and that's why we're supporting the Ashington to Blythe to Tyne rail line. And the start of our £500 million investment in connecting towns whose stations were closed during the beaching cuts, amongst many other benefits that we are going to bring to the people of Blythe. I thank him for his support. We are going to repay the trust and confidence of those people by investing in their communities.
Mr Speaker, Carbon Homes, a registered social landlord, has over 30,000 homes in the north and north-east. Detailed research that they have conducted shows that the 5-week delay in universal credit payments ensures that many families amass huge rent arrears before receiving anything and are trapped in debt for years. 72% of their tenants on universal credit are now in significant rent arrears, over half of them technically destitute. The Prime Minister's mantra that work is the route out of poverty is true only if there are jobs that are full-time, permanent and decently paid. When will the Prime Minister going to stop this deliberate policy of inflicting impoverishment and destitution on tenants of the Carbon Homes and other registered social landlords in the North East?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm happy to study the particular case that he raises, but universal credit is available from day one, and I stick firmly to my belief that the best route out of poverty is not benefits but work, and it is I think what we have achieved with this government is record low unemployment and record gains in employment across the country, and wages are now rising. Wages, they don't want to hear it, Mr Speaker, but the truth is wages are now rising for the low paid as well.
Peter Bell.
Mr Speaker, last Thursday, at the dead of night, the Prime Minister made a secret visit to Kettering General Hospital. No media entourage, this was no photo call. He'd come to listen. He listened to staff. He listened to patients, and he left at 3:30 a.m. And Mr Speaker, one patient said, "I thought Boris was a bit of a dopey bloke who doesn't really know what's going on." But But he was a lovely bloke and actually caring to all other patients. Prime Minister, what did you learn from your listening visit?
I learned what a wonderful staff we have in the NHS, and I'm delighted to say that Kettering General Hospital NHS Foundation will receive £3.7 million seed funding for a full redevelopment, in addition to the £46 million that we are now putting into their urgent care hub. This is the party of the NHS, delivering on the people's priorities in Kettering and across the country.
Matthew Pennicoat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the purpose of clarity, if the Cabinet Office inquiry into allegations that the Home Secretary breached the Ministerial Code establishes that her conduct fell below the standard expected of a Government Minister, in any way and on any occasion, can the Prime Minister confirm that she would be expected to resign or be removed from office?
Mr. Speaker, I return to the point I made earlier on, which is that the Home Secretary is doing an outstanding job delivering change, putting police out on the streets, cutting crime and delivering a new immigration system, and I'm sticking by her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having knocked on doors across Stafford in my constituency, it is clear that the A&E at County Hospital is a vital local service. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that A&E units at medium-sized hospitals like County are essential for the future delivery of care in our NHS?
Mr. Speaker, the Health Secretary, my right honourable friend, has just told me, passing the ball swiftly down the line, that yes, her A&E is certainly staying open. I thank her for the point that she makes.
Resignation of an experienced civil servant.
Yeah, go on,
Sacking of a government aide. With this government, it seems that allegations of bullying or just being incompetent get you promoted, whereas standing up to it, you lose your job. What does this say about this Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I loathe bullying, but I'm not taking any lessons. I'm not taking any lessons from a party that has presided over systematic bullying and discrimination against those who stick up for the Jewish community and for Israel in this country. And we've still yet to hear a proper apology from the Labour Party, from the Labour leadership, for what they've done.
Mr. Speaker, the Taliban have resumed their attacks in Afghanistan, and today the US have undertaken defensive airstrikes, undermining the fragile peace deal which will see the release of thousands of prisoners and the continued export of opium to extremism. Does my right honourable friend share my concerns that no peace deal can bypass the Afghan government, and give me his assurances that we will stand shoulder to shoulder with Afghan women who have already lost their lives just to fight for dignity under Taliban rule?
We of course stand shoulder to shoulder with the government of Ashraf Ghani, and she is right, by the way, in what she says about women in Afghanistan. It is one of the great achievements of this country, despite all the sacrifices that we experienced in the operations in Helmand, that millions of women in Afghanistan were helped into education thanks to the interventions of this country, and we can be very proud of what we did.
Colonel Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're all becoming increasingly concerned about COVID-19, the coronavirus. But every week, 650 of us come here from every part of the UK, spend several days operating in close proximity and meeting people from all over the world. We then return to our constituencies, potentially becoming the very vectors that we're trying to shut down. Parliament must stay open, but what plans does the Prime Minister have to utilise systems such as conference calls and electronic voting to ensure that we do not become part of the problem?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's raising a very important point. And the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, together with my honourable friend the Health Secretary, will be saying a little bit more in the next couple of days about what we are going to do to delay the advance of coronavirus in Parliament and in other large gatherings. And I think we're still at the containment stage. She will understand the distinction that the government is making. When we come to the delay phase, she will be hearing a lot more detail about what we propose to do with large gatherings and places such as Parliament.
Alan Cairns.
My constituent Tom Channon was just 18 years old when he tragically died at the Eden Rock complex in Mallorca in July 2018. This was an incident that was totally preventable and avoidable. It came just 5 weeks after Tom Hughes from Wrexham fell to his death at the same site in similar circumstances. Nothing had been done to make the site safe. An independent surveyor's report has pointed to serious health and safety deficiencies. Tom's parents, John and Kerry Channon, have been campaigning for a criminal case to be brought against those responsible. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, use all his influence to press the Spanish authorities to pursue a criminal prosecution that will not only seek justice for Tom, but would also send a clear message to other accommodation owners in Mallorca to prevent similar tragedies occurring in the future?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend very much for raising what sounds like an appalling case, and I can certainly say that, and I'm sure the whole House will join with me in expressing our deepest sympathies to Tom's family and friends, and to get justice for Tom, to seek justice for Tom. I am very happy to ask the Foreign Office to begin talks first with him and then, of course, with their Spanish counterparts.
Mr. Speaker, last month a young man from my constituency was fatally stabbed, and just this weekend another young man was stabbed in Coventry. Violent crimes in the city is rising, yet I only have 10 police officers in my constituency, some of which I share with my Coventry colleagues. Seeing as the Prime Minister made such a big deal about his 20,000 new police officers, can he tell my constituents whether we are going to get our fair share?
Yes, well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise the issue of stabbings and violent crime, which I agree with her are too high and must come down. That's one of the reasons why we're increasing the number of police officers in this country. And as she will have heard in the House just now, in the West Midlands, that number is going up by 366 immediately.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware that due to coronavirus, demand for air travel has decreased around the world. Is he aware that due to slot allocation rules, there are perverse incentives on airlines to fly half-empty planes around the globe so as not to lose those particular lucrative slots? Will he seek a derogation for UK airlines from these international rules, if only for the sake of the environment?
Well, my honourable friend raises a characteristically brilliant point, which I confess that it hasn't been drawn to my attention so far, but I will look at what he is saying. It certainly seems crazy that planes should be flying simply to retain the slots to which they are entitled, and we will see what we can do.
Liz Campbell.
The Prime Minister promised on the steps of Downing Street to fix the crisis in social care. We need an extra 580,000 care workers, not to improve services, but just fill existing vacancies and meet the basics of growing demand. Even if the government funds increases in the pay and status of carers, where on earth are we going to find all these extra staff when EU workers will be excluded under his new immigration system? Our and the NHS depend on...
Order! I make the decisions. Please, we want shorter questions. No, just finish. When I get up, please give way. Very quickly.
Will he meet with me to discuss a special migration route into social care to stop the current crisis getting even worse?
Well, I don't know quite what she means by excluding EU workers, Mr. Speaker, since there are record numbers of EU workers currently in this country, and indeed more can come until the end of the year when they can register. And I have every confidence that we will solve the issue of social care. We will be bringing forward plans very shortly, which I hope will attract cross-party support to make sure that everybody gets the dignity that they need in old age, and nobody is forced to sell their home.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My right honourable friend with righteous zeal has acted to curb the early release of terrorist prisoners, but he must know that those plans will put at risk by malign bourgeois liberal judicial activists. So will he, in the spirit of our wonderful new Attorney General, urge an urgent review of the legislative means they use to do their work to put our people at risk and the government's plans in jeopardy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is certainly true that I think that people have been let out far too early, far too often. And that's why we're not only looking now into stopping the early release of serious sexual and violent offenders, but that's why we have already produced legislation to stop the early release, Mr. Speaker, of terrorist offenders.
Geoffrey Donaldson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of continuing concerns in Northern Ireland amongst business about the Northern Ireland Protocol. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with a cross-party delegation of members of Parliament representing Northern Ireland and business representatives to discuss with us his commitment to maintain unfettered access to the UK market for Northern Ireland business?
Mr. Speaker, I have no difficulty at all making such an undertaking because, after all, it's very clear from the protocol that unfettered access for Northern Ireland will continue.
Order. I have granted leave to the Right Honourable Member for South Northamptonshire to make a personal statement following a resignation from government. I remind the House that interventions are not allowed and that there can be no debate arising from such statements. I call the Right Honourable Andrew Lett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to use this personal statement to place on record what an incredible job this is and to encourage others, particularly women, who are thinking about public service, that you really can make a positive difference. Since 2010, we've lived through 3 general elections, 3 referendums. I've worked for 3 different Prime Ministers and even had just 2 tilts at the top job myself. And during that time, we've learned a lot. First, there's the value of a punchy catchphrase, from long-term economic plan, remember that? To take back control, to get Brexit done, or as we like to say, got Brexit done. But it's the action behind these words that has given us the highest employment there's ever been, a superb Conservative majority, and a free and independent United Kingdom. I've also learned the value of knowing exactly what you're voting for. So, for example, colleagues, if your whip tells you as a newbie MP to go through the eye lobby and vote for something called the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, just say no. And the Chamber has learned a lot about Erskine May, from the precise meaning of forthwith to the specific purpose of an SO24, and even how a speaker should vote in the event of a tie. But the key lesson for me has been the importance of focusing on your beliefs and behaving with honour, whatever the cost. When I arrived in this place, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, if not strictly youthful after 25 years in finance, my ambitions for what I called my 3 Bs, Brussels, banks and babies. Brussels, or Brexit, started out as an enthusiastic attempt to reform the EU from inside. I set up the Fresh Start project with my honourable friend for Daventry and my right honourable friend for Camborne and Redruth, with support from 200 colleagues. We set out the case for EU reform, but it soon became clear that that wasn't on offer, and the rest is history. Now, this time coincided with my first ever rebellion against a 3-line whip, as one of 81 Conservatives to vote for a referendum on EU membership, leading to media speculation that I had told the Chancellor, George Osborne, if you'll forgive me, Mr. Speaker, to F off. Well, I can assure you that there is only one person to whom I might be tempted to provide such frank advice, and that wouldn't include any former or current Chancellor, and certainly not any current Speaker. My second B, banks, was a personal mission after seeing the damage done by the financial crisis and Labour's lack of oversight. As a new MP elected to the Treasury Committee, I could hold the banks to account over LIBOR rigging, stop their plans to scrap chequebooks, and also challenge our brand new, as was described at the time, rock star Bank of England governor over QE and the euro crisis. City Minister was my first job in David Cameron's government, working to introduce new pensions freedoms, setting up the ring fence for banking groups, arranging for the Post Office to provide banking services on the high street, and actually recovering over £1 billion from the Icelandic government after the bailout of IceSave. And then after David Cameron's excellent win in 2015, I was moved to energy, with my good friend Amber Rudd as Secretary of State. We rebalanced the needs of the fuel poor with speedy growth in renewables. We announced that coal would come off the grid entirely by 2025. And we kept the lights on through one of the tightest winter energy margins ever. And that was the year of Paris COP21. And it's a real source of pride to have joined that global effort to tackle climate change. And I wish my right honourable friend, the member for Reading West, huge success as COP President when the UK plays host later this year. Mr. Speaker, the result of the EU referendum in June 2016 is right up there with England winning the World Cup for rugby 16 years ago. It's right up there with the look on John Bercow's face when I told him to apologise for calling me a stupid woman. And it is a bit behind the happiness of my wedding day. But not surprisingly, the leadership election that followed is also forever etched in my memory. My own part in Brexit was always about doing what I thought was best for the UK. And whatever has been said about it, my decision to withdraw from the final two was to give the country the urgent certainty that it needed. I'm tempted to say something about a mother, but I'm just not going there. But as the new Environment Secretary in 2016, it was amazing to be setting up the huge Brexit project in the department to deliver for farmers and fishing communities the bright future they were promised. Developing the 25-year environment plan, banning sales of modern ivory, creating the first ever litter strategy, and introducing CCTV in slaughterhouses. They were just a few of the highlights. But throughout the time I spent in her cabinet, I fully supported my right honourable friend for Maidenhead in her determination that Brexit should mean Brexit. And during my 2 years as Leader of the Commons after the 2017 election, the challenges of a hung Parliament became so evident right from day one. Delivering pizza was hard enough. Delivering Brexit proved nigh on impossible. But in spite of that, we amazingly achieved royal assent on almost 60 bills and passed over 600 pieces of secondary legislation to prepare for Brexit. But like the proverbial swan, whilst we were gliding on the surface, the business managers were paddling furiously underneath. And I pay tribute to each of them and to my superb private office. When the harassment and bullying scandal hit Parliament in 2017, I was so proud to pull together the cross-party coalition that devised the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme with a clear goal that everyone who works in or visits Parliament should be treated with dignity and respect, and that confidentiality should underpin everything. And as leader, I had one of the most beautiful offices in the palace, whose only limitation was the rat living in my waste paper basket. So when a legislative slot appeared for the Restoration and Renewal Bill came along, we grabbed it. Preserving this iconic palace as the seat of our democracy for future generations will be a huge achievement for all those involved, and I wish them success. And a long-awaited change that I was so glad to introduce was to give all members of this House the same rights as workers across the country, and that is to spend time with their newborn or adopted babies, which we did via a new proxy voting system. Which brings me to the third of my 3 Bs, babies. As many in this House know, better support for the early years is essential to levelling up, to solving health inequalities, and to promoting lifelong emotional well-being. In 2011, I launched the 2001 Critical Days campaign, with support from every party in this House, from many members of the other place, and from almost every early years stakeholder. Frank Field, the late Dame Tessa Jowell, the honourable members for Washington and Sunderland, for Manchester Central and for Brighton Pavilion always worked on a cross-party basis, and I'm grateful to them. I set up PIP UK as a charity that would provide support across the country for families struggling with a new baby, and I pay huge tribute to my honourable friend for East Worthing and Shoreham, who took over my early years campaigns and charity responsibilities when I joined the government, and he's done a brilliant job for so many years. And as Leader of the Commons, the former Prime Minister asked me to chair an interministerial group looking at early years, how the government could provide better support. The team spent a year researching existing provision, from health visiting to breastfeeding advice to talking therapies to parenting groups, and select committees held detailed inquiries into the impact of early years experiences on later outcomes. There is no doubt that a focus on this area could be life-changing for millions. So resigning as Commons leader last summer was a tough decision, driven by my concern that the withdrawal agreement bill, as then proposed, with the potential for a second referendum, would not have delivered our exit from the EU. As leader, I would have had to bring that bill forward, and I couldn't in all conscience do so. I was sorry to see the resignation of my right honourable friend for Maidenhead, the leadership of our country and party once again being challenged by the decision on the EU. No one could have worked harder than her, and I feel sure history will judge her kindly. In the new leadership election, a number of candidates, myself included, supported by my great friends for Daventry and South Derbyshire, sought to offer a way forward for the country. But after defeat in the first round, I gave my wholehearted support to the Prime Minister. I genuinely believe he is the right person to seize the opportunities that await us outside the EU. And it was an honour to serve as Business Secretary in his first cabinet. Brexit readiness was the urgent priority, but setting a new, clear direction for BEIS was top of my agenda. With my ministerial team, we agreed our mission to build a stronger, greener, united kingdom. And to achieve that, our priorities: first, that the UK will lead the world in tackling global climate change; second, that we will solve the grand challenges facing our society; and third, that we will quite simply make the UK the best place in the world to work and to grow a business. And there's one key observation I would highlight from my 6 months in BEIS, and that is that our climate change ambitions are not just about doing the right thing, but I believe there's also a huge early mover advantage. UK science and innovation could make the UK green tech sector as big in years to come as UK financial services is today, and I'm confident that my right honourable friend will seize this opportunity. So, Mr. Speaker, the last general election showed that when people said in 2016 that they wanted to leave the EU, they really did mean it. And I applaud the Prime Minister for his single-minded focus on getting Brexit done. For my own part, I will now focus my attention in Parliament on that third B, babies, and I look forward to renewing my passion for giving every baby the best start in life. And when the Prime Minister asked me to step aside, he also gave me his word that he will enable me to take forward the early years work, and I'm delighted that the wheels are in motion. And I want to heartily congratulate him and Carrie for their decision to do their own bit of early years research. Mr. Speaker, I will have... You saw that coming, okay. You didn't write it, however. Mr. Speaker, I will, of course, continue to work hard for my fabulous South Northamptonshire constituency, and I do look forward to spending some more quality time with my family. It's been an incredible 10 years, and it ain't over yet. There is no greater honour than to serve community and country, and I will continue to do so with pride.
Christine Jardine, point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since there have been further allegations today about the conduct of the Home Secretary, I wonder if the Secretary of State could advise, I wonder if the Speaker could advise on how Parliament could initiate a genuinely independent inquiry into the conduct of the Home Secretary towards civil servants in those departments. Thank you.
Can I just say, and thank you to the Honourable Lady for giving me notice of the question. What I thanks for your note, Ben. Could have waited. I'm honestly grateful for giving me notice of the point of order. What I would say, it is not a point of order for me, as she well knows. I understand it's an attempt to raise what is a matter of debate and not for me as chair. No further points of order. We now come to President.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014, so there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balanced stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.